"Sign here, and we'll handle everything from now on," my brother said, sliding the inheritance transfer document across the polished mahogany table. "Dad's company is too complex for someone like you to manage anyway." I didn't argue. I just sat there staring at the paper, then carefully capped my pen and placed it back in my jacket pocket. "My name is Daniel Harrington, 54 years old, eldest son of Richard Harrington, founder of Harrington Construction in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and until that moment, presumed heir to a family legacy built over 40 years, taking time to consider it." My brother Thomas asked, his voice dripping with fake concern. "There is nothing to think about. The board already supports us." I stood up, straightened my tie, and walked out of our family company's conference room without a word. No shouting, no accusations, just quiet acknowledgement. As I passed the reception desk, Marceline, who'd worked for my father for 30 years, couldn't meet my eyes. The portrait of my father in the lobby seemed to follow me with its gaze as I pushed through the heavy glass doors into the Minneapolis winter. What Thomas didn't know, what none of my siblings knew, was that I'd been preparing for this day for 7 years. Ever since the cancer diagnosis that took Dad from us, I had been playing a very different game. I drove through the snow-lined streets toward the modest 3-bedroom home where I'd lived since my divorce 12 years ago. Nothing flashy, practical, with a basement workshop where I spent my weekends. Unlike my brother Thomas, with his lake house, or my sister Catherine, with her downtown penthouse, I never saw the point in flaunting wealth. Dad taught me that appearance and substance were rarely the same thing. "Value sits in the foundation, not the paint," he used to say. The bitter irony was that Dad had built Harrington Construction on exactly that principle: solid foundations, quality materials, honest labor. He grew the company from a 2-man operation to the largest commercial contractor in 3 states. I had worked alongside him since I was 16, starting with summer jobs, carrying lumber, and cleaning job sites, working my way up through every department. Thomas and Catherine took different paths. Thomas got an MBA and joined the company in his late 20s, immediately demanding a vice president title. Catherine went to law school and practiced corporate law in Chicago before returning to Minneapolis 5 years ago to help modernize the family business. Neither had ever read a blueprint or set foot on a job site until they had corner offices. Dad always seemed amused by their corporate ambitions, but never discouraged them. "Different strengths for different parts of the business," he would say, when I complained about their lack of practical knowledge. "They think construction is beneath them," I responded once. "Let them think what they want," Dad replied. "Understanding how things actually get built is a knowledge that can't be taken from you." When Dad was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer at 72, the family dynamics shifted immediately. During his 8 months of treatment, Thomas and Catherine began attending industry events, introducing themselves as the future of Harrington Construction. They hired consultants, initiated rebranding discussions, and started using phrases like streamlining operations and legacy modernization. Dad noticed, but said little, conserving his strength for the fight against the cancer consuming him. In his final weeks, he asked to speak with each of us alone. My siblings emerged from these conversations looking satisfied, almost smug. When my turn came, I sat beside his hospital bed, holding his once powerful hand, now thin and veined. "Danny," he said, using the nickname he'd called me since childhood, "you know what's coming after I am gone." "They'll try to push me out," I said simply. He nodded, conserving his energy. "They see the company as an asset to be impeded. You see it as a purpose." He squeezed my hand with surprising strength. In my home office, behind the painting of the first project we completed, here is a safe. Combination is your birthday. Inside is a letter and a key to a storage unit. Don't open it until you need it. I nodded, confused, but trusting. Thomas and Catherine are smart, but they don't understand what actually holds things together, he continued. Remember when you were 12? And I caught you taking apart the lawnmower. I smiled at the memory. You weren't even mad. You just handed me the right tools and said if I was going to disassemble something, I should at least do it properly. And when Thomas broke his bicycle chain, he blamed the manufacturer and demanded a new bike. Dad's tired eyes crinkled. People reveal who they are through their reactions to broken things. Some fix, some replace, some blame. He closed his eyes for a moment, gathering strength. The company isn't just buildings and contracts. It's people and promises. I know, Dad. The letter explains everything. But Danny, his eyes locked with mine, wait until they show their full hand. Patience reveals truth. 3 days later he was gone. At the funeral, Thomas and Catherine stood beside me, accepting condolences from hundreds of people from the construction industry. Contractors, suppliers, architects, competitors, all there to honor Richard Harrington. Many clasped my hand firmly, saying things like, "Your father taught me everything I know," or "Richard always kept his word, even when it cost him." As we lowered my father into the frozen January ground, I noticed Thomas checking his watch. The board meeting was scheduled for the following Monday. I knew what was coming, but following Dad's advice, I waited. I attended, listened, and watched as Thomas and Catherine presented their vision for Harrington Construction's future, which involved selling off the equipment division, outsourcing project management, and focusing on high-margin luxury development. The board members, 3 outside directors Dad had appointed years ago, plus Thomas, Catherine, and me, listened politely. When they finished, Arnold Beckman, the longest-serving board member, and Dad's old friend, asked, "And what does Daniel think of this direction?" Before I could answer, Thomas jumped in. "Daniel's expertise is in operations. We're talking about corporate strategy here," Catherine added smoothly. "We think Daniel would be most valuable focusing on project execution rather than company leadership." I said nothing, just nodded thoughtfully, as if considering their words. Over the next 3 months, I watched as Thomas and Catherine began implementing their vision. They hired a marketing firm to redesign the company logo, removed Dad's mission statement from the website, and started meeting with investment bankers about capital restructuring options. Employees began coming to me with concerns. Foremen worried about rumors of layoffs, project managers confused by new reporting structures, administrative staff anxious about outsourcing. I listened, reassured them as best I could, but made no promises. In my evening hours, I began visiting the storage unit Dad had left me. Inside was a filing cabinet full of documents, a laptop, and a recorded video message from my father. I spent weeks reviewing everything, understanding the intricate contingency plan he had put in place. 6 months after Dad's death, Thomas and Catherine made their final move. They called a special board meeting and proposed a new corporate structure that effectively removed me from any meaningful authority. My position would become legacy advisor, whatever that meant. I was to be given a generous salary, but no operational control or voting rights. "It's really the best solution for everyone," Catherine explained, not unkindly. "You get financial security without the pressure of executive decisions. And the company gets our full modernization plan," Thomas added. "The market is changing, Danny. Construction isn't just hammers and nails anymore." Arnold Beckman and the other outside directors looked uncomfortable but offered no objection. They were close to retirement themselves and held only minority positions. That was the day Thomas handed me the inheritance transfer document, expecting me to simply sign away my birthright. The day I walked out without a word. That evening, I opened my father's letter. It was detailed, specific, and revealed a side of Richard Harrington few had seen: the strategic planner who had built a construction empire through careful, forward-thinking moves. Over the past 5 years of his life, sensing Thomas and Catherine's ambitions, he had quietly restructured the company's most valuable assets. The equipment division, which Thomas was so eager to sell off, had been transferred to a separate LSC 3 years earlier. The real estate holdings, including the company headquarters, fabrication facilities, and equipment yards were owned by another entity. The most valuable construction contracts had assignment clauses that required my personal approval for any transfer. Dad had created a complex structure that left the Harrington Construction name and public-facing elements under family ownership, but placed the operational heart of the company, the parts that actually generated value, under my control through separate entities. The letter ended with a simple instruction. When they try to take what they haven't earned, don't fight them directly. Let them discover that what they've seized is merely the shell, not the substance. But Daniel, remember, this isn't about punishment. It's about protection of the company, the employees, and the legacy we built. Give them a path back, if they're willing to earn it. I sat in my basement workshop that night, running my hands over the hammer my father had given me on my 16th birthday. The wooden handle was worn smooth from decades of use. I thought about Thomas and Catherine, about the employees whose livelihoods were at stake, about my father's legacy. The next morning, I called Joseph Merritt, the attorney who had helped my father create his contingency plan. "They've made their move," I told him. "It's time." Joseph nodded. "The documents are ready. How do you want to proceed?" Exactly as Dad outlined, no shortcuts. For the next week, I went to work as usual. I attended meetings, reviewed project timelines, visited job sites. If Thomas and Catherine noticed my lack of reaction to their effective demotion of me, they didn't mention it. They were too busy planning the press release, announcing their new leadership structure. Then came the quarterly management meeting, where all department heads and project managers gathered to review company performance. Thomas and Catherine had invited their consultants and investment bankers, clearly planning to announce their new vision to the entire management team. I arrived early and sat quietly at the back of the room. Thomas raised an eyebrow at my presence, but said nothing. At precisely 9 a.m., he called the meeting to order. "Thank you all for coming today," he began, standing at the podium with Catherine beside him. "As you know, Harrington Construction is entering a new era. My sister and I are excited to share our vision for the company's future." The doors at the back of the conference room opened, and Joseph Merritt entered with his associates carrying several boxes of documents. "Excuse the interruption," Joseph said politely, "but before we proceed, there are some important legal matters that need to be addressed." Thomas frowned. "We're in the middle of a meeting. Whatever this is can wait." "I'm afraid it can't," I said, standing. "Joseph, please continue." The attorney nodded and began distributing documents to everyone in the room. "These papers outline the actual corporate structure of what you know as Harrington Construction, as you'll see. The company is actually comprised of several entities, each controlling different aspects of the business." Catherine snatched a document, scanning it with her lawyer's trained eye. Her face paled. "This can't be right." "It is," I said, walking to the front of the room. "Dad restructured the company 5 years ago. What you've been trying to take control of is essentially a management company with limited assets. The equipment division, real estate holdings, major contracts, and intellectual property are all held by separate entities." Thomas was flipping through the pages frantically. "Who controls these entities?" "I do," I said simply, "as the executor of Dad's contingency plan." The room erupted in confused murmurs. Project managers exchanged glances. Department heads whispered to each other. I raised my hand for quiet. "Let me be clear. Nothing about your jobs has changed. The projects will continue. Payments will be made. Work will go on. This isn't about disruption. It's about protection." "Protection from what?" one of the project managers asked. I gestured toward Thomas and Catherine. "From hasty decisions by people who don't understand what makes this company work, from selling off divisions that aren't high margin enough, from replacing experienced employees with outsourced services." Catherine recovered first, her legal training kicking in. "We'll challenge this in court. Dad wasn't in his right mind when he did this." Joseph cleared his throat. "Miss Harrington, these arrangements were made 5 years ago. Well, before your father's illness. We have video documentation of his instructions and rationale, multiple witnesses to his mental competence, and all the proper legal filings. You are welcome to challenge it, but I should warn you that your father anticipated that response and prepared accordingly. Thomas slumped into a chair, the reality of the situation sinking in. So, what happens now? You just take over everything. No, I said. Now we negotiate a sustainable future for Harrington Construction, one that honors Dad's legacy while adapting to new realities. I turned to the room full of managers and employees. Everyone is dismissed for the day with pay. Please take these documents home, review them, and understand that your jobs are secure. We'll reconvene tomorrow at the same time. As people filed out, many nodding at me with newfound respect or relief, I asked Thomas and Catherine to remain. When we were alone, except for Joseph, I sat down across from my siblings. You've spent 6 months plotting to remove me from a company I've worked at for 35 years, I said quietly. A company Dad and I built together while you were pursuing other interests. You were so focused on getting control of the name and the corner offices that you never bothered to understand how the business actually functions. So, this is your revenge? Catherine asked bitterly, humiliating us in front of the entire company. I shook my head. If I wanted revenge, I would just let you proceed with your plans. You would have sold off vital assets, alienated key employees, and run the company into the ground within 2 years. Your reputations would be ruined. Instead, Joseph interjected, Daniel is offering you a path forward, one your father explicitly designed. I pushed 2 identical folders across the table. These are new operating agreements for the consolidated company. They establish a clear division of responsibilities based on actual expertise. Catherine would oversee legal and compliance. Thomas would manage finance and business development, and I would continue running operations and project execution. We'd be equals? Thomas asked suspiciously. In authority, yes. In equity, no. I retain controlling interest, but you both receive significant ownership, stakes tied to company performance and longevity. Catherine opened her folder, legal mind already analyzing the document. These vesting provisions, they require us to stay with the company for at least 5 years to earn full equity. Yes, I nodded. Dad called it earning your inheritance. He believed that ownership should be connected to commitment. Thomas looked up from his copy. And if we refuse? Then the entities remain separate. You can keep running the shell of Harrington Construction, but without the equipment, real estate, key contracts, and most of the senior staff who would come with me. That's not much of a choice, Catherine said. It's more than you offered me this morning, I replied evenly. There was a long silence as my siblings processed their options. Finally, Thomas spoke. I need time to think about this. Take 24 hours, I said, standing. The offer expires tomorrow at noon. As I walked toward the door, Catherine called out, Danny, wait! Why did Dad do this? Why didn't he just tell us? I turned back. He tried in his own way. All those years he invited you to job sites, or suggested you spend time in different departments. You both saw those invitations as beneath you. That wasn't fair, Thomas protested. We were building our own expertise. Maybe, but Dad believed you can't effectively lead what you don't understand. This company isn't just numbers on a balance sheet or legal contracts. It's the people who pour concrete in freezing temperatures, the project managers who solve impossible problems, the relationships built over decades of kept promises. I reached into my pocket and pulled out 2 identical keys. Dad left these for you. They open a storage unit like mine. Inside are letters he wrote to each of you, and I think some personal items. He said, you'd be ready for them when the lesson started to make sense. I placed the keys on the table and left. That night, I couldn't sleep. I walked through my house, looking at photos of Dad and me at various job sites over the years. In each one, he had that same proud expression. Not because we were making money, but because we were building something that would last. The next morning, I arrived at the office early. To my surprise, both Thomas and Catherine were already there waiting in the conference room. They looked tired, like they hadn't slept either. "We went to the storage units," Catherine said without preamble. I nodded, waiting. Thomas pushed a thumb drive across the table. "You should watch Dad's message to us." "That's private," I said. "Not anymore," Catherine replied. "We want you to see it." I inserted the drive into my laptop and opened the video file. Dad appeared, looking healthy. This must have been recorded years before his diagnosis. He was sitting in his home office, the same room where he'd hidden my letter behind the painting. "Thomas, Catherine," he began, "if you are watching this, then the contingency plan I created has been activated. I imagine you are angry, confused, and probably feeling betrayed." He sighed. "I don't blame you. But please understand that this wasn't done to hurt you." He shifted in his chair, leaning forward. "I built this company from nothing, not just for wealth, but to create something meaningful, something that employs good people, builds structures that last generations, and stands for quality when that's become rare. You both have tremendous talents. Thomas, your financial acumen is extraordinary. Catherine, your legal mind is sharper than any attorney I've ever worked with. But a construction company isn't just balance sheets and contracts. It's relationships, knowledge, and hard-earned trust." Dad's eyes seemed to look directly into the camera. "I set up this structure not to exclude you, but to ensure you would learn what matters before you could control what's valuable. Daniel isn't perfect. He's stubborn, sometimes too traditional, and could benefit from your innovative thinking. But he understands the soul of this business in a way you haven't yet had the chance to learn. This isn't the end of your leadership journey. It's the beginning of your real education. Work with your brother. Learn what he knows. Teach him what you know. Together, you three could build something far greater than I ever did." The video ended and I closed the laptop slowly, processing his words. "He recorded a separate message for each of us," Thomas said quietly. "Mine talked about how proud he was of my ambition, but worried I saw people as resources rather than partners." Catherine nodded. "Mine mentioned my tendency to look for loopholes instead of understanding the purpose behind rules." "So, what do you want to do?" I asked. Thomas and Catherine exchanged glances. "We'll sign the agreements," Thomas said, "but we want to propose some amendments." I raised an eyebrow. "Such as?" "Quarterly strategic reviews where all three of us have equal input," Catherine suggested, "shared approval on major investments, and a commitment to modernizing certain aspects of the business," Thomas added. "Not everything needs to change, but some things should." I considered their proposals. "That seems reasonable. Joseph can draft the amendments today." As we worked through the details, I noticed a shift in the conversation. For the first time since Dad's death, we were actually discussing the company's future rather than fighting over control. Thomas asked thoughtful questions about ongoing projects, and Catherine inquired about key employees and their roles. By late afternoon, we had signed the revised agreements. As we stood to leave, Catherine hesitated, then asked, "Danny, why didn't you just take everything? You could have cut us out completely." I thought about Dad's letter, about his vision for the company and the family. Because that's not what this company is about. Dad built it on solid foundations, honest work, and second chances. I couldn't honor his legacy by betraying those principles. Thomas extended his hand. "I can't promise this will be easy." I shook it firmly. "Nothing worthwhile ever is." 6 months later, we gathered for the groundbreaking ceremony of Harrington Construction's largest project to date, a new hospital complex that would serve the entire region. As I stood beside Thomas and Catherine, each of us holding ceremonial shovels, I spotted several familiar faces in the crowd. Arnold Beckman, now officially retired, but beaming with pride. Marteline, Dad's longtime receptionist, dabbing at her eyes. Dozens of foremen, project managers, and employees who had watched our family drama unfold and were now witnessing something unexpected healing. After the ceremony, Thomas pulled me aside. "You were right about the equipment division. After spending time with the team, I understand why Dad never wanted to sell it." Catherine joined us, nodding. "And I've been reviewing our subcontractor agreements. The relationships are more valuable than the price efficiencies we might get from switching providers." I smiled, feeling something I hadn't experienced since before Dad's illness. Hope for the company's future. "You are both quick learners when you actually pay attention." Catherine laughed, a sound I hadn't heard in years. "And you are adaptable when you stop being so stubborn." The digital project management system is actually improving field communications. As we walked toward the construction trailer for a team meeting, I felt Dad's presence not in a mystical way, but in the solid foundation beneath our feet, the quality materials being unloaded from Harrington trucks, and the skilled workers bringing blueprints to life. He had built more than a construction company. He had created a framework for his children to build something even more important, a shared purpose that could survive even the strongest storms of family conflict. 3 years later, Harrington Construction celebrated its 50th anniversary. The company had grown substantially under our shared leadership, expanding into new markets while maintaining the quality standards Dad had established. Thomas's financial strategies had increased profitability without sacrificing employee benefits. Catherine's legal expertise had protected us during an economic downturn while creating innovative partnership structures. At the anniversary gala, the three of us unveiled a bronze statue of Dad that would stand in the headquarters lobby. As hundreds of employees and their families applauded, I found myself thinking about that day Thomas had slid the inheritance document across the table, so certain of his victory. Dad had known all along what would happen. Not because he didn't trust Thomas and Catherine, but because he understood that true inheritance isn't just what's given, it's what's earned through understanding, commitment, and sometimes difficult lessons. I placed my hand on the statue's shoulder, a gesture Dad would have appreciated. "The foundation," I whispered, "not the paint." Later that evening, as the celebration wound down, I found myself alone in Dad's old office, now a shared conference room for the three of us. The painting that had once hidden the safe still hung on the wall, though the safe itself had been emptied years ago. I heard the door open and turned to see Thomas and Catherine. "Thought we'd find you here," Thomas said, holding 3 glasses and a bottle of Dad's favorite whiskey. Catherine pulled out chairs. "Annual report shows we've doubled in size since the Great Succession Crisis, as the employees now call it." I accepted a glass with a smile. Dad would be proud, not of the numbers, but of what we built together. We raised our glasses in a silent toast. 3 siblings who had nearly torn apart a legacy, but instead had strengthened it. The whiskey burned pleasantly as I thought about Dad's final lesson, that sometimes what seems like an ending is actually the beginning of something stronger, more resilient, and built to last. The true inheritance wasn't the company itself, but the wisdom to know what makes anything valuable. Solid foundations, honest work, and the courage to protect what matters, even when it means standing alone.